There's a building in Edgewater, Miami at 777 Northeast 26th Terrace. It is 57 stories tall, 249 units, waterfront on Biscayne Bay. It wears the name of one of the most recognizable luxury fashion houses in the world, Missoni, the Italian brand famous for its zigzag patterns, its handcrafted knitwear, its presence in every serious fashion publication for 6 decades, the brand whose aesthetic is so specific, so immediately recognizable, that the name alone carries a price. The building is called Missoni Baya. It is the first and only Missoni-branded residential building in the world. It was developed by a billionaire named Vlad Doronin, the founder and CEO of OKO Group, a man whose personal fortune is measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars, who is known in the global luxury real estate market as one of the most aggressive and design-focused developers operating in the United States today. Construction began in 2019 with a $243.3 million construction loan. Units sold for between $650,000 and $9 million. The building opened and was turned over to residents in 2024. And on January 30th, 2026, the Condo Association of the world's only Missoni-branded residential building filed a lawsuit in Miami-Dade Circuit Court against OKO Group, against Asymptote Architecture and Revuelta Architecture International, against Civic Construction, the general contractor, against 19 subcontractors, 76 alleged construction defects, cracks in floor slabs, cracks in foundations, cracks in columns, water intrusion in units, water intrusion in stairwells, water intrusion in the parking garage, defective fire alarm devices, defective sprinklers, leaks in pool plumbing, portions of the tower that were not built to specification, furniture, finishes, and decorative elements described in promotional materials that were never installed, and buried deep in OKO Group's own separate lawsuit against its insurers, filed in April 2026, a disclosure that the Condo Association's lawyers had not yet found when they filed in January, a disclosure that changes the nature of every defect in the building. The skyscraper's foundation sustained damage from uneven settling during construction. In 2021, 3 years before the building opened, 3 years before a single resident moved in, the foundation of the world's only Missoni-branded residential building had already been damaged by uneven settling before the first unit was ever sold. That is the beginning. This is the rest of the story. Here is what the Missoni Baya sales brochure does not explain. The sales brochure for Missoni Baya is one of the most visually precise marketing documents produced for a Miami luxury residential development. Every page carries the Missoni aesthetic, the zigzag pattern that the brand has owned since Ottavio Missoni introduced it at the 1967 Haute Couture Fashion Week in Florence. The color palette, the handcrafted textile references, the suggestion of Italian artisanal precision applied to the experience of living in a waterfront building in Edgewater, Miami. Units were marketed as extensions of the Missoni brand itself, not just apartments with a fashion house's name on the lobby. Living spaces designed in dialogue with the Missoni aesthetic, where the built environment expresses the same values that the brand has expressed in fabric and thread for 6 decades: precision, craft, attention to detail. The idea that the material world around you reflects the care that went into making it. That is what Missoni means. That is what buying a unit in Missoni Baya was supposed to mean. Here is what the residents found when they moved in. Cracks in the floor slabs. Not one unit, not one floor. Cracks identified across the building's systems and components in practically every nook and cranny, in the words of the Real Deal's coverage of the lawsuit. Cracks in the foundations, cracks in the columns, the structural elements that carry the weight of 57 stories from the foundation to the roof. Water coming through walls in residential units, water coming through stairwell walls, water pooling in the parking garage, fire alarm devices that do not function correctly, sprinkler systems with defects, pool plumbing that leaks, lobby furniture, finishes, and decorative elements that appear in the promotional materials and do not appear in the finished building. The association's complaint, filed under Florida Statute 558, accuses OKO Group of knowingly failing to correct defects identified by its own consultants and design professionals, not failing to discover the defects, failing to correct defects that their own consultants had already found. The association also accuses the developer of failing to disclose deviations from the approved plans, of building something different from what the permits described, without telling the buyers who had already paid for what the permits described. And then, in April 2026, in a separate lawsuit filed by OKO Group against 4 of its own insurance carriers, a piece of information emerges that was not in the January complaint. The foundation sustained damage from uneven settling during construction in 2021. OKO is seeking $22.4 million from its insurers to help cover what it says are total losses of more than $55 million related to construction damage and delays. $55 million in a building financed with $243.3 million in construction loans. And the damage The settling, the foundation damage, the losses happened in 2021, 3 years before the building was turned over to residents, 2 years before construction was complete, while the units were still being sold, while the Missoni brochures were still being printed, while buyers were still being told their units would deliver at the quality the Missoni name implies. This is the story of what happens when a $243.3 million construction loan, a 57-story tower, a world-famous fashion brand, and a foundation that settled unevenly in 2021 arrive together in Miami-Dade Circuit Court. Start in 2016, New York City. A real estate developer named Vladislav Doronin, born in St. Petersburg, Russia, trained as an architect who built his fortune in Russian real estate and commodities, trading in the 1990s and early 2000s before moving his primary development operations to the United States, announces a partnership with the Italian fashion house Missoni. The project, a residential tower in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood. The branding, the first Missoni residential building in the world. Doronin's company, OKO Group, is not a small operation. Its portfolio includes ultra-luxury developments in Miami, New York, and internationally. Its flagship Miami project, Una Residences, is a 47-story tower on Brickell Bay Drive that represents the high end of what OKO produces. Doronin himself is a figure of global real estate prominence. He has been ranked among the most powerful figures in the luxury property market by publications from Forbes to Architectural Digest. He is, by any measure, one of the most credentialed luxury residential developers operating in the United States. For the Missoni Baya project, he partners with Hain International, a London-based real estate investment firm, and secures a $243.3 million construction loan. The site, 757 Northeast 26th Terrace in Edgewater. A neighborhood that, in 2016, is in the middle of a transformation from a mixed-use Miami district into what the real estate press is calling the new design district waterfront. Edgewaterfront's Biscayne Bay, it sits between the Wynwood Arts District to the west and the Bay to the east. It is, in 2016, the kind of neighborhood where a Missoni-branded tower makes market sense. Not Brickell, not Miami Beach, Edgewater, where the buyers are a mix of international luxury purchasers, domestic design-conscious buyers, and investors who see the neighborhood's trajectory and want to be positioned ahead of it. The architects selected are Asymptote Architecture, a New York-based firm known for its technology-integrated design approach, working with local firm Revuelta Architecture International. Construction begins in 2019. The design is striking. A curved tower with a sculptural silhouette that changes appearance depending on the angle from which it is viewed. The facade carries references to the Missoni aesthetic, not literally, not with zigzag patterns applied to the glass, but in the layered, textured approach to the building's exterior that the brand's design philosophy implies. From the water, from the bay, from the highway, the Missoni Baya Tower reads as something specific. A building that was designed to be a building, not a generic residential product with a brand name dropped on it. Construction proceeds through 2019, through 2020, through 2021. And in 2021, the foundation sustains damage from uneven settling. Here is what uneven settling in 2021 does not explain on its own. The disclosure in OKO's April 2026 insurance lawsuit is precise. The skyscraper's foundation sustained damage from uneven settling during construction in 2021. That is the complete sentence. No further detail has been released publicly about the nature, location, extent, or remediation of the foundation damage. OKO's lawsuit against its insurers is not primarily about disclosing the foundation problem to the public. It is about recovering money from 4 insurance carriers, Zurich American Insurance and 3 others, who OKO alleges have not fully paid claims related to the construction damage and delays. OKO says its total losses from the construction issues and delays exceed $55 million. The insurers, it alleges, have covered some but not all of that. OKO wants the remaining $22.4 million. That is the lawsuit's purpose. The foundation disclosure is incidental to the insurance claim. But incidental in an insurance lawsuit is not the same as insignificant in the context of 249 residential units that were sold to buyers who paid between $650,000 and $9 million for apartments in a building whose foundation settled unevenly in 2021. Stop here. Because what uneven foundation settling in a 57-story building during construction actually means, and why it is not a condition that resolves itself when construction finishes, and why it is the geological context inside which every crack in every column and every floor slab that the Condo Association documented in its January 2026 lawsuit must be understood, is the part that transforms a list of 76 construction defects into something more serious than a punch list. Here is what uneven settling does to the structure above it. A building's foundation is not just the structure that holds the building off the ground. It is the reference plane from which every other measurement in the building derives. The columns are plumb, perfectly vertical, relative to the foundation. The slabs are level, perfectly horizontal relative to the foundation. The connections between the columns and the slabs are designed for the forces that occur when vertical columns carry vertical loads straight down to a stable, level foundation. When the foundation settles unevenly, when one section drops more than another, when the reference plane tilts or deforms, the columns and slabs that are attached to it are no longer plumb and level. They are slightly off. The forces in the structural frame are no longer purely vertical. The connections between columns and slabs experience bending moments, rotational forces, that the design did not specify. The concrete at those connections develops stress concentrations. Those stress concentrations, over time, under load, in Miami's coastal environment with its salt air and its groundwater cycling, produce cracks. Not immediately, not in a single dramatic moment. Over time, building progressively in the columns, in the slabs, at the foundations. Everywhere the condo association's forensic engineers went and looked. In 2024, when the residents moved in and found 76 alleged defects. In practically every nook and cranny of a building whose foundation had settled unevenly in 2021. Think about what this means for the buyer who paid $9 million for their unit. They are not buying a problem that appeared after they moved in. They are buying a problem that the developer's own insurance claim says was present during construction, that the developer's own consultants identified, according to the condo association's lawsuit, that the developer, according to the association's lawsuit, knowingly failed to correct and failed to disclose. A $9 million apartment in a building with a damaged foundation, whose developer is suing its insurers for $55 million in construction losses, while simultaneously being sued by its own residents for 76 construction defects. Both lawsuits were filed in 2026, after the building opened in 2024, after the Missoni brochures were distributed, after the units were sold. Here is what the $55 million in construction losses does not explain. OKO Group's lawsuit against its insurers is a claim about money, but the gap between what OKO says it lost during the construction of Missoni Baya, $55 million, and what its insurance carriers paid. $55 million is not a small construction problem. $55 million is approximately 22% of the $243.3 million construction loan. In construction finance, a cost overrun of 22% is not a rounding error. It is a significant event, one that triggers review at the lender level, one that requires transparent reporting to the capital stack. One that, in a project where units are being actively sold at prices between $650,000 and $9 million, raises questions about whether the buyers were informed, whether the buyers who signed contracts and paid deposits knew that the building they were purchasing into had experienced construction losses of over $55 million, whether the marketing materials that described a Missoni quality product at Missoni implied prices were accurate representations of the building being delivered, whether the foundation damage from 2021 and the construction losses of $55 million and the 76 defects found in 2024 are three descriptions of the same underlying problem, a construction process that encountered serious difficulties and produced results that did not match the design and specification documents. The condo association's attorneys, in their framing of the case, used the phrase buyer beware. That phrase carries a specific legal weight. It is not an exculpatory phrase. It is an accusation. It says, the developer had information that buyers did not have. The developer had information about the foundation settling, about the $55 million in construction losses, about the defects identified by its own consultants. That was material to the decision to buy. It did not share it. The attorney for the association uses a different phrase for this. He says the developer cut corners. He says the developer used inferior materials. He says the developer built the tower in a manner inconsistent with industry standards. And then he files 76 specific allegations, documenting exactly what he means. OKO's response, through a spokesperson, is that the association has made allegations that the developer disputes and will address through the legal process. Vlad Doronin declined to comment personally. Hain International, the co-developer, is not named as a defendant. Civic Construction, the general contractor, is named. The 19 subcontractors are named, the architects are named, the engineers are named. Everyone who touched the building is named, except the brand whose name is on it. Here is what Missoni's name on the building does not protect. Missoni, the Italian fashion house, is not a defendant in either lawsuit. The brand licensed its name and its aesthetic to OKO Group. It provided design direction. It brought its visual language to the project. Its creative involvement was real. It is not responsible, legally, structurally, or financially, for the cracks in the columns, the foundation settling, the water intrusion, the fire alarm defects, the sprinkler leaks. Missoni did not pour the concrete. Missoni did not specify the foundation. Missoni did not select the subcontractors. And yet, the buyer who paid $9 million for a unit in the Missoni Baya Tower was not buying concrete and rebar. They were buying the Missoni promise. They were buying the idea that the standards applied to the building reflect the standards applied to the brand. That in a world full of luxury buildings with generic names, a building that carries the name of a fashion house with 6 decades of craft reputation is built to a standard that generic buildings are not. That the same precision that goes into every hand-loomed Missoni garment goes into every concrete pour in the Missoni bada tower. That is the purchase. That is the price. And the forensic engineers from the association's consultants who walked through practically every nook and cranny of the world's only Missoni-branded residential building and documented 76 defects are not measuring the garments. They are measuring the concrete that cracked, the foundation that settled unevenly, the water that is coming through the walls, the fire alarms that do not work. The brand on the building says precision. The forensic report says 76 defects. Those two statements are the complete distance between what was sold and what was delivered. Both things are true about Missoni Baya at 777 Northeast 26th Terrace in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood. By any measure of architectural ambition and market positioning, it is one of the most visually distinctive luxury residential towers completed in Miami in the last decade. A 57-story curved tower on Biscayne Bay, designed by Asymptote Architecture in collaboration with the Italian fashion house, whose zigzag pattern is one of the most recognized visual signatures in the history of luxury design. 249 units. A waterfront location in a neighborhood whose trajectory has matched the ambitions of the developers who bet on it. A project that attracted buyers from the international luxury market at prices between $650,000 and $9 million. A billionaire developer with a global portfolio of design-forward luxury developments who brought $243.3 million in construction financing. And a world-recognized brand name to an Edgewater site that most developers would have considered a secondary address. A building that, when it opened in 2024, represented the completion of a project that had been nearly a decade in the making. The first Missoni-branded residential building in the world. And Missoni Baya is also a building whose foundation sustained damage from uneven settling during construction in 2021, 3 years before the residents moved in, while the units were being actively sold. A building whose developer's own insurance lawsuit discloses total construction losses exceeding $55 million, approximately 22% of the $243.3 million construction loan. A building that the Condo Association's forensic engineers found to have 76 alleged construction defects, identified in the lawsuit as present in practically every nook and cranny of the finished structure. Cracks in floor slabs, cracks in foundations, cracks in columns, water intrusion in units, stairwells, and the parking garage, defective fire alarm devices, defective sprinklers, pool plumbing leaks, furniture and finishes, described in promotional materials that were not installed in the finished building. A building whose developer, according to the Condo Association's complaint, knowingly failed to correct defects identified by its own consultants, failed to disclose deviations from the approved construction plans, and used inferior materials in a manner inconsistent with industry standards. A building that is now the subject of 2 active lawsuits in Miami-Dade Circuit Court and Miami Federal Court simultaneously. One filed by the residents who paid between $650,000 and $9 million for their units. One filed by the developer seeking $22.4 million from its own insurance carriers. Both lawsuits filed in 2026, both describing the same building, from opposite directions. The brand on the building says Missoni. The forensic engineers say 76 defects. The developer says its losses exceed $55 million. The residents say, this is not what we bought. The insurance carriers have declined to comment. Vlad Doronin has declined to comment. The Italian fashion house, whose name is on the facade, is not a defendant. The concrete that is cracking is not named in any branding agreement. The foundation that settled unevenly in 2021 did not consult the Missoni design team before it moved. The building is the first Missoni residential building in the world. It is also a building where the residents are suing the developer for knowingly delivering a product inconsistent with what they were sold, where the developer is suing its own insurers for $22.4 million more than was paid on $55 million in losses, where the forensic engineers found cracks in practically every nook and cranny, and where the Missoni name, the name that was supposed to guarantee a standard, that was supposed to make the price worth paying, that was supposed to mean that this building is different from the luxury tower down the street, is on the facade of a building with 76 documented defects and a foundation that moved when it was not supposed to. The first Missoni building in the world, the first Missoni lawsuit in the world, both things arrived at the same address, at 777 Northeast 26th Terrace, in Edgewater, in Miami. Both things are still true.